as you're turning there, do we have any prayer requests for tonight? I know one praise and one prayer request all at the same time. Miss Joyce, it's great to see you back this morning or this evening, whatever time of day it is. So praying that, the answers will be found with everything. So, anyone else? Okay. Anyone else? I have not heard anything from Ray. I haven't heard anything since Sunday when I saw him. But let's keep her in our prayer. Anyone else? If not, the floor is open to whoever wants to pray. And I will close this out. Let's go, Lord, in prayer. Most holy and heavenly gracious Father, as we come before you tonight, God, we lift these names up. Miss Joyce, Brother B.H., Miss Jean, and there's so many others inside of our congregation who are sick, shut in, dealing with various situations right now. And Father, there's a desire for answers, a desire for direction, a desire for provision. Lord, in all this, there's a need for you. Father, we lift these names up to you right now, asking that you would pour out on each of the situations. Give the doctors answers. We ask that you'd bring about healing. Father, that there would be peace, understanding, and strength. Father, we ask all of this because we know you're the one who provides. And Father, above all else, we trust that you, as you do provide, you provide exactly what we need. Sometimes it's not what we want, but it's exactly what we need. So Father, right now I ask that you would please help us to focus our eyes on you. Lord, that right now you would open our hearts and minds to your word. You would speak to us in this time. It's in your Son's heavenly and gracious name that I pray. Amen. So as we've studied through these names for God, they're names that we find in the original Hebrew text. Individuals, as they came through times and situations, God shows up, shows off, as he's led the person through, out of the wellspring of their heart they speak. They understand a different characteristic of God. And I have to say, out of all the names that are in this series, and all the names that are inside Scripture that we know related to God, Jehovah Jireh is one of my favorite. The Lord will provide. There is something about that, as we've studied him as the creator, his awesome power, everything about him, even down to the personal name, Yahweh, I am. And everything that every situation we go through, every time that we deal with how it is that God would speak to us on those situations. His provision is one of those that just constantly, it always blows me away. How many times he's come through situations in miraculous ways. And it may be that the leading up to it scares the ever-living daylights out of you. My father-in-law has told me, he said, God's never let me down. He scared me quite a few times, but he's never let me down. And there's those times when we think, here's how I would like for it to happen. Here's what I think needs to go about. And when God comes in his own time, afterwards we can see, if he had answered it in our time, it would have been disastrous. But as the answer is that in his time, we find a place where we rely on him that much more. As I spoke about last week, we're carried through these situations so that we would know more about him. And tonight is probably one of those difficult passages for many outside the church to understand. Especially when you think about the offering of Isaac. But in the midst of this situation, this beautiful name, Jehovah Jireh, is uttered. And it is amazing. I was thinking, as I considered for this lesson, I was thinking of the Looney Tunes cartoons. Y'all know those, Bugs Bunny, Sylvester, Taz the Tasmanian Devil. And I think about Bugs, there's a scene where, I forget what he's holding, but he has it in his hand. He goes, I will love him and hug him and kiss him, and I will call him George. And you see that as he holds, it's a death grip. And the thing in his hand is just like, please let me go, let me go. And how many times is that in our lives? Whether it's a job, 401k, children. We have something in our lives that we can't let go of. We almost start to find our identity. We fall so in love with a blessing that it actually trumps the one who blessed us with it. It starts to want to take the throne in our hearts, take our attention, take our understanding, and focus it all on it rather than the one who gave it. That's where we find the place of idols. When we have something so deeply entrenched in our life that we have to come to the place where we have to understand Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. When we think we can't go without it. There's no way that this could ever be the place. No way that God could ever want this until he actually brings us up to it and we see exactly what we need. This is one of those ones, I think it's really well suited in how my father-in-law, being one of my chief mentors, he's given me a lot of insights. And sometimes people think, well, I'm the only one. If I leave, there's no one's ever going to fill in the position. And he always told individuals when they get to it, he said, I want you to take a bucket of water, put your hand into it, and pull it out real quick. The hole that's left is exactly how much God needs you in that moment. So let me ask you, what happens when you put your hand in the bucket of water and pull it out? What size hole is it? There is none. It fills back in. And those situations, those moments when we want to hold on to it so tightly and we think there's no way God could provide anything else, but we have to understand who is the one who controls it all. Who is the one that created everything out of nothing. And if we understand that, then we understand the beauty of this passage and of this name. Well, let's read. I'm going to read the whole of this, and then we'll start working our way through. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took two of his young men with him and Isaac his son. He split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to the young men, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father, he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord Will Provide, Jehovah Jireh. As it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you. And I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to the young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Beersheba. Verse 1 and 2, the question that I came to was, who is number one in your life? God makes the request here of Abraham that no parent would ever want to hear. You think about up to this moment, It had taken 25 years from the first time God had given a promise of the covenant that he would have with Abraham. That he would make him and his family a great blessing to the nations. And over again, God had come back and shown him. And had Abraham been faithful in this time? No. He tried to take it in his own hands. Remember of Hagar and Ishmael. But God didn't hold it against him. And still, he brought about a son. And here, seemingly, as God says, now take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, go to the land of Moriah, offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. He's putting before him, who's more important, me or your son? How is it that you will try this? You know, we see this in our culture and how hard it is. Whether it's for the parents sending their child off to military or off to the mission field and having to let the children go, not knowing whether they will ever see them again. And it's really a test, one that I have not had to know, but one day I may have to. And I think when you consider, especially with how some hold so closely to their kids. I've known Christians that will change their biblical stance all because their child decided to come out of the closet. They were something that they had held so desperately to, understood, here's what God's word speaks to it, and now to appease their child, they'll change everything. Why? Because the relationship with their child means more than their relationship with God. It may not be that extreme. I've told you all about the kids, the two girls that I had in my first youth group came to me and said, we feel like we're supposed to go on a mission trip. Both of them were going to dangerous areas, but they both knew exactly where God was calling them to. And what did their parents come to me? Please talk them out of it. And the understanding that I had to fall back on and tell them was, you know, I can't do that. Because if that's where God's called them to be, where's the most safe place on earth? Right where God's called them to be. And in those moments, we have to come to the place of seeing things as they are, putting everything before God and saying, hey, what is my priority? You consider what Isaac was to Abraham. Isaac was the long-awaited promised fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham. While he was loved by Abraham, he was also needed by him to continue the fulfillment of God's covenant. If he died, then the line seemingly vanished. Because remember, when was Isaac born to Abraham? 100 years old. Any of y'all want to wait till 120 years old and start having kids again? Probably scares you out of your mind right now, just that one thought. Even if it was right now and say, nope, hey, I'm in retirement age, grandkids are enough to wear me out. I mean, you consider the different conflicts that were going on in Abraham's mind. First, there's a theological conflict. This goes against the promise of a future nation and the mandate not to kill. Then you have the emotional conflict. When your faith collides with your affections. Then you get the social conflict. He will never become a great name if he kills his son. A relational conflict. What would Sarah think on this matter? It's amazing. I don't think Abraham told Sarah what he was going to do. Just think about it. Where would she have been? No. This is a woman that laughed at it. She had very strong feelings on it. Can you see the perfect storm that's probably playing out in Abraham's life as he considers this? The stress level must have been high. The trial that he would have to go into was so insane that he had to come to one decision. Whom did he trust? Did he trust himself? Did he trust nature? Or did he trust God? I like how Tony Evans speaks on the matter. He says, trials are adverse circumstances that God introduces or allows in order to identify where we are spiritually and to prepare us for where he wants us to go. It's been said in our life we're either going through a storm, coming out of one, or going into another. Every single time we come through, we have something new coming on. Why is that? Why is it that God sends trials and tribulations through our lives? So that we would come closer to him. So that we would have a better understanding of what he would have us to go through. We take comfort in knowing that trials must first pass through God's hands before they can reach us. Nothing comes our way without having first received divine approval. If he approves it, he must then have a purpose for it. That's something I've had to learn over the last 4 years. In different trials and tribulations. And it's not that I didn't know it before, but it's become more concentrated. When you consider those opportunities that we have, that we are brought into, I'm talking about the ones we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy. But then you ask God, why am I having to go through it? We've talked about verses like Romans 8:28. We know that God is working all things together for what? Good. For us. For those who are called according to his purpose. Those who are his children. We understand that everything comes to us. And while it may be hard and it may stretch us, and sometimes how it stretches us, even if it's to the point of death, it may be for the encouragement of others going through the times. I have to think that when you take a look at books like Fox's Book of the Martyrs or Voice of the Martyrs organization as they tell about the persecution of the church around the world, sometimes what they go through, if it serves any purpose at all, it's to encourage, to strengthen. We may not like to think of it that way, and it may serve a lot deeper purpose than we fully understand there. But if we can trust that God is already working it for something in a higher purpose than what we know, that's the place of ultimate rest. In those times, we understand he's providing already before we even ask. So when he asks here for Abraham to take his son, he's saying, look, who's the one who provided him in the first place? Like I said, when was Isaac born? Abraham was 100. He was well beyond what he thought was natural to produce. It's well beyond what our modern medical technology would say, right? I mean, you think about it. Abraham laughs in his heart and thinks, will God really do this? Sarah does it out loud. They didn't think it was feasible. But once again, he's coming to the situation. Who is the one that provides? Who is the one in control? It's hard when you're going through those hard times, isn't it? I was thinking about that this week, was that how many times we go through those hardships and it feels like there's a fog or like it's pitch black. And you may feel like you're alone. But that's when you're supposed to take trust and rest in knowing that God, even in those dark times, is already working. He is still there. There is nowhere that he is not. We say that with his omnipresence, everywhere all at once. And if we trust that, then we understand he's carrying us through. He's walking us through those situations. Regardless of how painful it is to give up what we love the most, always we are to know that God has a plan and a purpose for the trials we go through. Because of that and that alone, we can thank him when we're in the midst of it. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? In the midst of it, God, I thank you. But think about it. What does it say in Job chapter 1, the tail end, when Job finds out about losing everything? What does he do? He gets up, tears his clothes, shaves his head, sits in the ashes, and that last word, he worships. Naked I came into this world, naked I will depart. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And that's one of the examples we're to trust in, rely in, and push forward in. Because when we understand who's number one, putting him on the throne and leaving him there and understanding that, that's when we can truly rest. You see here that as he's called to it, Abraham puts his faith into action. He rose early the next morning, saddled his donkey, took his 2 young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for the burnt offering, arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you." Abraham took the wood and the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and the 2 of them walked together. Notice the verbs. He rose, he saddled, he took, he arose, he went. All of these verbs put forth that this was an immediate response. It wasn't he delayed or he thought about it, but he arose, saddled, took, arose, and went. It doesn't say that he tried to bargain with God. It doesn't say that he asked why or tried to sneak a substitute. But I ask you, how was he able to do this? Turn over your handout. You'll notice that I put the verses that are mentioned. Isn't it on there? Is it? It did. Okay, those are not. Turn over then to Hebrews chapter 11. I had it on one set, and I changed some stuff this afternoon, and the old ones got thrown away. So, Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 and 19. If we take a look at Abraham here, how is it that he was able to trust and put into action so well? Hebrews 11, 17 through 19. Hebrews 11, 17 through 19. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In Isaac your descendants shall be called." He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he had received him back as a type. There's a faith here, knowing that the one who created life is the one who can bring it back to life. the one who can function in these times. In the midst of his pain and his confusion, he worshiped the one who brought forth life from two aged and worn out bodies, could no doubt resurrect Isaac from the dead. Sometimes God allows us to experience larger than life problems because he wants to reveal more of himself to us. It doesn't make sense to walk away from the problems before God mightily reveals himself. In those opportunities, in those times, who is it that we're trusting in? All too often, our issues with trials is what? We don't want to go through them. It's too hard, right? We deal with this with kids, right? When they're learning. Right now with Titan, I can't do it. I can't do it. Did you try to do it? No, I can't do it. So what do you think I have to do with him? No, sit down. We've talked this. But here's how to do the laces. Here's how to do this. Here's how to take your sock off standing this way. And in those moments, you have to walk them through the situation. We have the same thing in our lives, don't we? God, how could I go through this? There's no way I could have to endure that. But God knows exactly what you can endure. He knows exactly what he's providing you in those times. And how much of a blessing is it when you come to the end, you've made it through what you thought you couldn't endure, and you're stronger. You have a new set of skills. You have a new understanding of God. And you are so much more than what you started out as. But you had to go through the hardships to come to the place of true growth. You see this as Abraham trusts this. It's why he takes it to the limit. It says, verse 7 through 14. Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold the fire and the wood, and where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together. Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar, and there arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his only son. He was taking him and saying, "How far are you willing to go?" Isaac wasn't stupid. And from what we know by the description of him, he's not like a Daniel-age kid. He's actually in his teens to 20s. And he still lets himself be tied up. Why? He trusted the Father, and who the Father trusted. As he put it there, he understood. Even in those moments when Abraham didn't have all the answers, who did? God. God had all the answers in this moment. When God does show up, and we see him here, verse 10, Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am. Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." I wonder if Abraham knew how far he would take it. At that moment, he knows. God had seen it. God enters in. as Abraham can see the full extent. God knew where Abraham would stop. But Abraham had to know it also. And imagine here as he comes to this moment, probably tears flowing down, heart rent every which way. Sudden joy comes on the scene. And look at verse 14. Or verse 13. Then Abraham raised his eyes, looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in place of his son. Let me ask you, have you ever seen an animal caught? Maybe trapped, maybe bushes, maybe just caught behind a piece of furniture in the house. Are they quiet? No. They make a bloody awful racket. They're going every which way. And in the midst of that, Abraham didn't see it. The supernatural provision that's brought here is so amazing. But you consider just the beautiful picture of what would come. Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. We understand this, especially this side of the cross, of the Lamb of God that was offered up in our place to give life and provide for us the way forward. Oftentimes, the answer to our trials that we're facing is sitting right in front of us. But we can't see it. We'll never know of it until God's ready to reveal it. Makes me remember the start of Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter we were just in a few minutes ago talking about it. And what does it say? By faith, Abraham did this. Hebrews 11:1 tells us, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of the things not seen. The amazing thing when you consider that, and you consider also the name for tonight, Jehovah Jireh. Jireh's root word in Hebrew literally means to see. The close relationship between God's seeing and God's providing is necessary in our life. As we walk out not by what we can see, but what God has called us to. What He's called us to hope in and trust in and rest in. That's what we're called to as we understand. And we come to this place like Abraham, verse 14. Now He called the name of this place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day. In the mount of the Lord it will be provided. You see, closing here, look at verses 15 through 18. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand on which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. When we come to those moments and we truly are resting in God, opened up to where He would have us to be, when He's on the throne and everything else has been put on the line, as He's called us to. That's the place when we, unlike Bugs Bunny who wanted to hug him and love him and call him George and hold him tightly, we've held out our hand to Him and said, have thine own way. Your will be done. Your kingdom come. Whatever we were holding on to tightly, that's what we're called to let go. And when we let it go, we understand sometimes it's given back in ways that we never expected. As we trust Him and we show Him our hope, our faith, we understand exactly what we've been called to. We understand Him so much better than what we knew. You think about it here. After Abraham shows how far he's willing to go, he offers up the ram, and God calls a second time to what? It hasn't escaped my sight. I've seen your heart. I've seen your commitment. I know what you're willing to do. You still have the blessing. I'm still going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, the sand on the seashore. Oh, how this blessing came as he comes to this place of hope. He understands God is still faithful. I love how Tony Evans finishes out his study on Jehovah Jireh. He says this: God longs to be Jehovah Jireh to you today, but He wants to know and experience that you're willing to obey Him, to seek Him, and to not place anything above Him as more important in your life. When He sees you honor Him that way, the way that Abraham did, you will discover the power of Jehovah Jireh in your life. You know, think about it. I've talked about it often here. How often do we want to be the one in control? Isn't that usually the problem with fear, anxiety? Because we're not in control, we're prone to be that. We're prone to just wring our hands and think, how will we do this? How will we do that? But when we come to that place of understanding who the one that's absolutely in control, then we find the place of greatest freedom. When we understand that if we're right where He would have us to be, He knows what we need. He'll provide it. And Jesus also gives us the understanding, if we ask in His will, what does He say God will do? He will answer. He will provide. You know, me and Connor were talking last night. He's been sort of worried about me. Because in the May 1st to the 10th, I'm going to Israel. And he's, well, what happens if this goes through? What happens if the plane goes down? What happens if terrorists get a hold of it? And he and I had to sit there and talk last night. I said, Connor, do you understand why I'm not scared? Psalm 139 tells me that God knows the number of my days before I breathe the first one. He knows when I'm going to die. So he's already the one in control of my life before I even breathe the first breath. I said, you take a look at Matthew chapter 6. And Jesus says, don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to put on. Why? Because the birds of the field don't have to worry about that. The lilies of the field don't have to do it either. But your Father who is in heaven knows exactly what you need. I said, and by the end of it, he says, you know what? Each day has more than enough issues. So why you can't, by worrying about it, add one single moment to your life. I said, if you really want to go to James. Where two men say, hey, in this next year, we're going to go to this city and do such and such and such and such. But what does James says? He said, no. You should say that if the Lord wills, here's what we will do. I said, who's the one in control of my life? Who's the one in control of everything I need? Who's the one that has and understands what's to come? That's Jehovah Jireh right there. That's the one who will provide. That's the one who will walk it through. I said, I think about those other things. But for all the times that in the Bible we're told, do not fear, do not be anxious, do not lose heart, do not worry, it's always predicated with, because God is your God. You're not to do any of it because He's the one in control. That's the beauty of Jehovah Jireh. There's not a single moment of our life that is outside of His sovereign control. And when we trust and understand that He's the one providing, and we understand, as we're going to take a look on Sunday night, I didn't even think of how all this would start playing in until right now. Sunday night, we're going to look at a beautiful song and a beautiful passage. That it's a prayer by Paul to believers of how they are to understand God and the true depths and riches that are being offered out to us if we would just trust Him, believe in Him, and follow where He would have us be. We would be so amazed by what He has set before us. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Most holy and heavenly gracious Father, as we come before You right now,